Can you hear us?
Rita, test. Can we hear you, Rita?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. They kind of automatically happen. Oh, they're up here. They should move.
They'll find us.
Oh, okay. They should find you. Someone, I'll be back. I have to start the other webinar, but I.
We have a translator for Delaney.
So that's what I'm gonna go find is translating.
Okay.
We're live on,
We're live
we are
with
live
the
on
world.
Facebook to the world.
Yeah, you're live to the world.
Greg, translating for Noemi.
She has somebody's already doing it.
Ah. You hear me?
Soul panel.
I tried 20.
Walk away from the computer. Rita, come back to the computer, please.
Still again?
You did.
Try to get it. Oh, shade. For most.
I took over.
That will be resolution. That's it.
Legislative outreach.
There'd be that. You have that.
My cousin.
This is so story. Rita, you good? You can hear us?
Hey, Medea.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
See me?
No.
Can you see me? I think we start anyway. All right, everybody. So everybody's seated. We'll get started.
Speak up.
You want to grab a seat?
Let everybody know she had it. I mean, it was on a Zoom.
Cuba, see?
No.
We're gonna get started.
Okay, we're going to start. My name is Bob Schwartz, and I am the Director of Global Health Partners and also a member of the SEDE Steering Committee.
Speak up a little more.
Make it closer. Is this better for you? I think the mic's working. I'll project.
Just before we start, I'm just seeing coming out of Havana that there's been an explosion in Marianao as a result of a forest fire. So generally, you should be aware of that.
Thank you. Okay, so this workshop is on advocacy and resolutions. And we've got a terrific panel today. Excellent work that's being done around Cuba legislation, around both SSOT and ending the embargo. So I'm going to be very brief in my comments. I know folks don't like to work on advocacy work. People don't like to work in Washington. The reality is that US-Cuba policy is being determined in Washington by the president and by the Congress. And what happens in Washington is directly related to what we do at the grassroots. With all of you and with everybody that's tuned in here today around the country. I'm going to be very brief. You know, we've got a short window. We've got probably 6 to 8 months this year. Come out of the midterm elections, going into a presidential campaign. A window, probably no more than November. We've got to maximize what we do. So I've got a panel of 5 people here today. We're going to try to do short presentations and then want to exchange ideas because what we do during the spring, the summer, will determine what US-Cuba policy is for years to come. So to my right is Natasha Bannon, is the head of the SEDE Steering Committee, former president of the National Lawyers Guild. To my right is Steve Rizzo from the SA National Committee Americas. His right is Joan Gibbs, New York, long-term progressive advocate who has been involved in Cuba legislation. She's really been the driving force behind the New York City Council resolution. We've got Rita Baruch on the webinar. I think you can see her on the screen. What do you think? Rita has been responsible for a lot of the resolutions, the dozens of resolutions that have been passed all around the United States. And I think as of last night, we've now got 77 resolutions that have been passed. Phenomenal work, and Rita has been involved in that for 3 years. And finally, at the very end, we've got Noemi Rapaza, who I think you've heard her this morning. She is the first vice president of ECAP, Cuban Institute for Friendship People, and she's been invited to speak about Cuban priorities. So let's stop here. I'll turn this over to Natasha. Natasha, it's yours.
Thank you. Should I?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How's everyone doing? It's great to be with you all. I'm also going to try not to speak too long. I know we're running a little bit over on the program. As Bob mentioned, I'm Natasha. I'm with ACERE, which is the Alliance for Cuba Engagement and Respect. You may have heard Medea speak about it earlier today. There's several of us in the room. If you're with ACERE, just maybe lift your hands up really quickly. So ACERE was started a few years ago, just very briefly, as a response to the vacuum in DC of real kind of progressive policy changes around Cuba, and as a way of trying to channel a lot of the tremendous grassroots activism that exists around Cuba in this country into some very concrete policy changes. Why is that important? The Solidarity Conference, because what is the blockade? It's a series of laws. How do you change that? You change the law. We do that. That's through DC. And it's not something necessarily that we have historically gravitated to. And yet, for those that have been to Cuba, likely you've been told by our allies and counterparts, the thing that they can't do is do what we can do, which is change the laws, which is hold our members of Congress accountable for continuing the blockade against Cuba. That's the one thing they can't do, and the one thing that they need us to do. And so ACERE is really trying to make that very easy for you. There's a number of things that I want to mention and put on your list, on the landscape for this month and month of action, March. Coming up, we have a very different congressional outlook than we did this time last year, and when we had this conference. We have, a hostile House of Representatives. And while we were able to make some advances there and get some really great, what are called dear colleague letters from up to 114 members of Congress at that time, the majority of the Democratic caucus, holding their President Biden, responsible for maintaining Trump-era policies and tightening of restrictions and sanctions around Cuba, which are not Trump policies, those are Biden policies now. Also, that landscape has shifted significantly. That doesn't mean that we can't encourage and force change. It just means that it looks a little bit differently now. One of the things that we are focusing on, because we understand that it really has very tangible and concrete harmful effects against Cuba's economy and population, is the maintaining of Cuba on the state sponsors of terrorism list. And throughout the month of March, there's going to be a number of things you can do. One, this coming week, you've likely heard about the days of action. March 15th and 16th, there's going to be a call into the White House. This is 2 minutes of your time. And we get these often like, click here, send a message to your member, call the White House. And quite often we'll spend months, instead of doing that, organizing trips to Cuba, organizing fundraisers, going to Cuba, spending thousands, instead of taking 2 minutes out of your lunch break to actually do something that could really have a very powerful effect, right? There are thousands of us doing this. This translates to, when we say in the blockade, to actually holding our elected officials responsible for doing that. particularly when we have like I said, a hostile house with members of Cuban American members of Congress who are likely going to advance extremely negative legislation that we hope will not pass the Senate and codify very harmful Trump era policies that are now Obama policies. So that we don't want to go not only that's my son who finds that very offensive. Also, you want us to go back that time. So, right? So we don't want to hear him cry throughout the rest of this webinar. Make sure everybody, there's a QR code going around somewhere that I want everyone here to scan. For those on Zoom, just go to acere.org. We have made it very easy for you to do two things this coming week. One, call the White House. Tell President Biden, there's absolutely no reason for Cuba to be on the state sponsors of terrorism list. There's no legal justification, despite what the State Department says. That's why 160 lawyers sent a letter to the State Department and the White House disputing the legal justification pretext. And there's no political reasons, particularly after the last election. Whatever electoral consideration existed, those no longer exist anymore. They never really did. That farce has at least been uncovered. And two, on the ACERE website, there's a form where you can reach out to your member of Congress and ask them to also weigh in specifically on this issue, where they can tweet, they can issue a statement, they can send a letter to their president as well, and be public and visible about this issue, the way that 114 members of them did just a little over a year ago. So if you want to know who those 114 members that signed on that letter to President Biden back in December 2021, they should have the exact same position. That letter said, take Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list. Make sure that they know that they said that. They're just saying the exact same thing that they agreed with a little over a year ago. You can find all of that on ACERE's website. On March 28th, we're going to be hosting a congressional briefing on this issue as well, with speakers, again, for congressional offices primarily, but it'll be open to the general public as well. We'll be sending information out. And if you want to find and be reminded of all of that, make sure you sign up on ACERE's website so that you can get all of our email alerts. I also want to let you know about a couple of bills that are coming out that once we have gotten Cuba off the state sponsors of terrorism list, that's an immediate policy initiative that we're pushing right now. But the next one is, of course, as always, the blockade. There's always legislation introduced. If we don't drum up energy and attention around it, it will die in the halls of Congress. And what we will hear a lot about is all of the negative legislation that's going to be pushed out of the House. So Senator Klobuchar and 4 other senators on the Senate side introduced a bill to promote trade, particularly around agricultural products. If you've been to Cuba since the pandemic, you know that there is, for a number of reasons, a dearth of food and medicine, access to food and medicine. And this would allow for that. It is not an end to the blockade, but it is a very concrete bill. A lot of opportunities, both for Cuban-side farmers and, of course, for Cubans to be able to access more food opportunities. We're going to be pushing that. We'll also likely be expecting and pushing a bill to come out of Senator Wyden's office that really does try to end the embargo, as he calls it. And we need to have all really engaged around these issues. What does that mean? That we're going to be organizing advocacy days in DC. If you're in New York, it's a short train or bus ride. It's like $20 bus ride down there for the day, just to go visit a couple members' offices. We'll hold congressional call-in hours with phone scripts, with email scripts. We'll let you know who the staffers are. We can put you in touch with your members and their foreign policy staffers as well. It's really, really, really important that your members of Congress hear from you. I know that sounds like rhetoric, but it actually is. It's much, dare I say, in this space. It may be more important than anything else you'll do or hear in this conference, because again, it's the one thing when we talk about in the embargo, this is the most concrete way to do it. And you know who they are hearing from? If they're not hearing from us, they're hearing from those people that attacked Carlos Lasso earlier today. Those are the voices they're hearing from. So they need to hear from all of us about what we expect our government to do. So Please, everyone, if you haven't scanned that QR, it's also posted outside. Sign up, call in, do the one click, take 2 minutes out of your day and send it to everyone in your network and post it on social media. And if you don't want to miss any future updates from ASERE, sign up on asere.org. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Natasha. To you're able to access. Rita, you available?
I think so. Is this loud enough?
Bump your volume up a little bit.
It's at the top.
Okay.
Well, you don't know how much I wish I were with you today. This is a strange way to present, but I'm attempting to be in the room. And it's great that you all came to this workshop. I have been, as Bob said, I've been involved in developing resolutions for a few years as part of a resolutions task force that's connected to the National Network on Cuba currently. And I'm going to say a little about why they are so important and useful, and some on how we did it. And I want to point out a few key model documents that we've developed that I really hope you'll access. I'm not sure, I know Steve was helping by distributing some materials today, and he's got a thumbs up. So, so I think you probably have those samples, which I'll mention. You know, much has been said today about the importance of getting Cuba off of this list that it never should have been on. I feel that, you know, whatever we admire, thank you, that helps. Whatever we admire, whatever we love about Cuba, their new family code, universal access to healthcare and education, the people themselves, the way the Cuban people honor and center and protect all life, that needs to fuel us. This is, as Natasha says, this is the moment to do these concrete actions to make sure that all our representatives and President Biden hear us loud and clear. I'm going to ask people to raise their hand. How many, this is an experiment, how many of you have been involved in some way in helping pass a resolution? Terrific, terrific. Thank you. And before I forget, you know, I also want to say that the other part of this is then publicizing the resolutions and using them as organizing tools, which Steve is going to speak more to after me. So the resolutions are especially important because they document, they codify the widespread US public support. It's, you know, a great way to directly amplify our voices. It also, of course, gives us a chance to educate people in our community, our elected officials. And, you know, something that we don't think about enough is that we have power as constituents. These representatives all have the obligation of attending to our constituent needs. I won't take time to show you, but I got this big mailer the other day from my new representative named Garamendi, and the whole thing is on how can we address your constituent needs? What branch of what part of the federal government do you need help with? Well, I think we know the answer to that. You know, they have to pay attention, and constituents have more power than we tend to think in demanding their attention, and at least demanding meetings in our home districts, you know, and or Washington. You know, the other thing is we've carefully developed these model resolutions, very carefully. You know, the clauses that are in there are designed to point out the inequities, are designed to educate them on why the policies are so unjust and need to change. And I really encourage everyone to read through the sample, or we call it a model resolution, that is specifically focused on removing Cuba from the SOT. You know, they're basically talking points, and I really encourage you to use them as such. So moving on, how did this come about? Briefly, I want to acknowledge that initially, our committee, which is the Richmond Regla Cuba Friendship Committee, we're a formal sister city with Regla. And we were approached by our beloved friend of blessed memory, Alicia Rocco, who lived nearby, who suggested that we could pass a resolution. And we developed it. It was taken up by progressive city council members, Eduardo Martinez and Gail McLaughlin. Eduardo's our mayor now and still very supportive. The resolution was passed. This was years ago, about 4 years ago. Others heard about it. Groups in Berkeley and Oakland, and then a larger organizing effort in San Francisco. And then people heard about it in other parts of the country. And it's amazing to me how much people were inspired by the successes that they heard about and realized how doable this is and what a great opportunity to document the support for Cuba. And it grew organically, it grew exponentially. So we realized what we could do was provide support, essentially some technical assistance by developing the documents and by working one-to-one with people who were contact people all over the country. So it's grown, and as Bob said, we're up to 77 resolutions. I hope you have some copies there of all the resolutions, and I encourage you to use that list as well in your advocacy. You can see that many of the resolutions were about the blockade as a whole, and now we are very much focusing singularly on the on removal from the state sponsors of terrorism list. I have a hard time even saying that in the same sentence as Cuba. It's just crazy. At any rate, we developed a streamlined version of it, and we just call it the model resolution for the SSOT campaign. And I believe you have copies of that. It is easily adapted to your own communities if you haven't yet passed a resolution. And also, if you've done one against the embargo, we really encourage everyone to also pass a resolution about the SSOT to bring that to light. It's really important then to do a publicity campaign through the media. We just passed our SSOT resolution here in Richmond, February 27th, unanimously. And we're about to send out the press information, but I believe you have a press release that that I developed. And you know, anything that's been developed, it was with the it was thanks to Code Pink, Acere, it was thanks to others who had already been developing those talking points and analysis. And so we're building, what I love about this is we keep building on each other's work. And I really think that that's essential. And the way we succeed is to continually collaborate, not be stuck in our one organizational framework or ego, but really together. You know, we're all spokes of a wheel. We're all arrows in a quiver, whatever metaphor you want. But the way that this will succeed is through all of us collaborating. And our resolutions group, this is our contribution towards that. So the new document that you have is the press release that, again, I suggest looking it over and adapting it as you wish. These documents are all on the nnOC.org website as well. And I want to give you one link, please, if you could jot it down in case you don't have it. It's bit.ly/NNOCTIPS. This is your link to the document that we developed that is called Tips for Passing a Cuba Solidarity Resolution. So as we've gone on, we put together these tips to assist and hopefully encourage communities that haven't done it yet. And you know what these steps are. But I'll just say briefly, you know, the important thing is to find supportive members or staff members of your city councils or your labor union, wherever you feel you can get it passed. And then gather these documents, get, you know, clear on the talking points, adapt the model resolution, and, you know, take it to the council. And when there is going to be a vote, another important part is to get people in your community to call in to, for example, the city council meeting and speak on this, because that also gives visibility. We just did that here in Richmond, for example. And then afterwards, you want to send out the press release, contact supportive media people in your area. So essentially, I'm encouraging you to access the tips through that link that was just recently updated, thanks to Kala from the NNOC. And let's see, I think I'm almost done. There's on the NNOC website, there's another version of the tips. It's called a toolkit. And that was developed in San Francisco. So they're both, you know, good and usable, very easy to use. Lastly, what I want to say is that I attribute our success to the fact that this is doable, the fact that people are inspired when they see that others have been able to pass resolutions. It's a unity of purpose. And now our job is to publicize, once you pass a resolution, use that fact, bring it up at meetings. You know, we have to think creatively about how to infuse this into other work we're doing and other public opportunities where we have not yet made those resolutions more stand out on their own, you know, make them more visible, use them. Refer to the 77, you know, use the list of full resolutions that have been passed. It's very impressive. And success begets success. There's no question. This will keep growing. We know of a number of cities that are, and labor unions that are doing it. It's all, by the way, labor unions all over the state of California have been passing the SSOT resolution. They shortened it even a little more, and Bill Camp has been on a mission taking it to all the different labor unions and councils. At least, I don't know, 15 or so have passed it already, with the goal of then taking once they are all passed, taking it to the California legislature as leverage. So there's many ways to use them. We're only limited by our creativity. So please, yeah, that's it. I'm gonna stop. Thank you. Bob, I can't hear anything.
Can you hear me now? Is that right? All the documents are available on the nnoc.org website. If you didn't receive one, there were more people than copies printed, so praise. I'll also hand out this resolution task force interest form. So if you are interested in passing a resolution, please sign up. just to introduce myself one more time, I'm Steve Rizzo from the Democratic Socialists of America National Committee. I'm also in the Boston area with Boston DSA, and in my personal capacity, I've been involved in passing 3 resolutions in the Boston area in the cities of Boston, Brookline, and Somerville. So what I'll talk about a little bit today is how to use these resolutions as organizing tools, particularly for building coalitions. And secondly, for follow-up on resolutions and how to leverage them, how to make use of them. So on the one hand, I think one important part of these resolutions is, although there are templates available, you really need to do some work of adapting these to your local city. So one of the aspects of adapting them, and it sounded like a lot of people have already been involved, so maybe you're familiar with this already, maybe not. But I think it's to do outreach to coalition partner orgs, first of all. The NNOC has a list of member organizations. Find one in your area, reach out, work with them. You can always look at, socialist organizations like Democratic Socialists of America. We have chapters in all 50 states. But also get creative. It doesn't need to be the same folks who have traditionally been part of the Cuba Solidarity Coalition. And I think if we're going to be an effective political force, we need to build a bigger coalition with more organizations that have been traditionally involved here. So in Boston, a few examples of the coalition orgs that we've built. We have July 26th organization, one of the oldest Cuba Solidarity orgs in the country, Massachusetts Peace Action. In the various cities, we've also worked with immigrant organizations, particularly Haitian American organizations were very interested in helping us because they had seen Cuban doctors working in their countries. Same with a Brazilian women's organization, right? They had also experienced the help of Cuban doctors. I think racial justice organizations are one place that we should definitely think about expanding if we have not already in our cities. And to just get creative, right? It doesn't need to just be politics, peace, and solidarity organizations. We can build out more and more. Part of this process is also to adapt the resolution templates to the interests of the city. So as an example, in Boston, we have built in some aspects around medical science because Boston has many research hospitals, universities. We felt it was important to try to make it seem like it was an advantage to the city. So the city councilors felt like they had a self-advantage in passing these resolutions. In Somerville, we took a different tack. Somerville doesn't have quite that many. We went for universities since Tufts University is kind of between Somerville and Medford. Find what works in your own community. And then for the follow-up, those personalizations, those adaptations to your own community can be exactly the thing that you can build out larger coalition and build leverage. So for example, if you were to add medical or environmental or university research into the resolutions themselves, then what you should do is actually attempt to build ties between those universities, hospitals, research centers, or environmental organizations with Cuba. And part of what that does is give you new stakeholders who are invested in Cuba's success. You want doctors to come to your lobby visits with you. You want people who are invested in environmental sciences. You want people who are, from universities. We want exchanges between Cuban universities and US universities. So this is part of how we build a larger coalition. And finally, you should use these resolutions as leverage for exactly the kind of work that Natasha was talking about with ASERI, that is lobby visits. The stuff that maybe isn't quite as fun as writing statements or passing resolutions is really important for actually changing the conditions, the political conditions in this country that maintain the embargo. So In our area, one thing we've been diligently working on is figuring out, cross-listing congressional districts with cities where we've passed resolutions. Then when you set up meetings with your congresspeople, just as Rita said, we need to be mentioning these, be explicitly talking about them as evidence for democratic outcry against the embargo, against the continuation of this failed policy. So that's where I'll leave it today. I'll keep it brief, but I encourage you to ask questions and we can get a lively conversation going about this topic. Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Joan Gibbs, and I did not mention when I first introduced her, that she's the president-elect of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. So Joan, the floor is yours.
And I'm gonna do something very unusual for a lawyer. I'm gonna I see what time you've been here a long time. So I want to first give like a brief historical background to New York City resolution. And then some general thoughts about preliminarily, I want to note though, that these resolutions are symbolic, but at the same time, they're important. And the importance lie in the fact that in getting the passage of the resolution provides us the opportunity to outreach to people, educate people about the Cuban embargo. That's how I see them. Provides the opportunity to educate people, and people, in this country don't know very little about Cuba, except, what they see, and they don't know too much about it at all. They know what major media and institutions like the new museum in Washington, D.C., there's a new museum called Victims of Communism. The whole museum devoted to that. Cuba. I haven't gotten down to see it, but I saw a document. And so these resolutions and getting through in the passage gives us an opportunity to educate people. And one of the things that we started out doing in New York City, but we didn't have a chance to really work early on because of the pandemic, was when we wrote the resolution, did a petition to go along with the petition. We did several versions of the petition. It was one version. The person who graphic artist for the petitions is in this room now, Sam Anderson. So he did one version of the petition that had, remember when Beyonce went to Cuba along with, there was a picture of Beyonce, right? And then of course there's a picture, pictures of Fidel with various people. But we did it because we wanted to, try out, just see, what attracted people. We knew the young people, we could get them to stop and we said something. Hey, look, this is with Beyonce, right? And so they would stop. They really did. The other thing I want to draw your attention to is that, so it's, in saying that, I want to say that the most important thing that you think about doing a resolution, develop a strategy about how you're going to get it passed. One part of our strategy involved writing to all our friends, usually a member of New York City, and asking them to write to their city councilman. And that worked. And then the other part of our strategy was to collaborate with other organizations. One of the organizations we collaborated with in New York City was the Democratic Socialists of America. That was a good thing. And also, I'm a member of the Professional Staff Congress, which is a union, the Union of City College Workers. And they passed the resolution. And I don't know, is anybody from the PFC here besides me?
Got one.
Okay, did you know, you know about that you had support, you didn't know about it? Really? Oh, well, it's
Online.
online. Oh, okay. You're in the regular union, right? Are you in the regular?
We're emeritus CUNY faculty.
Yeah, okay, right, I'm retired too, so you're in the retirees chapter, right? Let's see what else I want to talk. It's important to develop a strategy as much as you can, you know, just don't rely on writing to people. Try to, you know, do a petition, get out in the street too, because that's important. Because people then will see you, and I think that's it, that's all I want to say.
You could just hold the question 1 sec, okay? We have one more speaker. So thanks so much, Joan. Our last speaker is Noemi Rapaza. Would you like to come up? Tell me what you're doing this morning.
I'm gonna translate.
You're going to translate. Perfect.
El objetivo fundamental de mi presencia es escucharme,
My fundamental objective being here is to listen to you.
porque había oído de las iniciativas o de lo que se va haciendo de manera individual y quería profundizar en todo lo que, conocimiento de todo lo que están haciendo.
I'd heard about the initiatives on an individual level, but I wanted to get a deeper understanding of what actually taking.
Y me parece muy interesante, antes de profundizar en algo, sencillamente dar las gracias.
Before getting deeper into this, I just want to simply say thank you.
Cada uno ha dicho, es importante, cada uno ha dejado un mensaje que a mí me parece que bueno que lo reforcemos aquí. Es cómo logramos sumar a más personas a cada una de las iniciativas y cómo logramos que nos articulemos entre todos para que lo que estamos haciendo tenga una mayor visibilidad.
And I think something that's been said earlier is very important. How do we involve more people in this? And how do we bring to support these initiatives? And how do we explain better why people should be involved in this?
Si el bloqueo está haciendo daño a Cuba por la política de máxima tensión que se está aplicando,
The blockade is doing damage because of their politics of maximum damage.
particularmente lo convierte en una política de asfixia haber incluido a Cuba en la lista de países patrocinadores del terrorismo.
It's practically a policy of asphyxiation to include Cuba in the list of state terrorists.
Porque la persecución financiera prácticamente neutraliza todo tipo de proceso que un país pueda hacer.
Because the neutralization of financial transactions basically, blocks the country from doing all kinds of things.
Por eso aplaudo que estén poniendo en las prioridades de este trabajo que se excluya a Cuba, todo lo que podemos hacer para que se excluya a Cuba de la lista de países patrocinadores del terrorismo.
I agree that anything that can be done to get Cuba taken off the list of state terrorists is very important.
Que hoy, repito, es lo que más daño está haciendo.
Because today that's what's causing more damage than anything.
Yo les quería compartir una iniciativa que también estamos acogiendo, va a desarrollar el movimiento de solidaridad con Cuba en Europa.
I want to share with you an initiative that's being organized by the Solidarity Movement in Europe.
Está organizando es un ejercicio que está en construcción todavía, por eso no le puedo dar un link y una página que puedan visitar para que les dé todos los elementos porque todavía no está concebido.
I can't give you a link yet or a web page because it's still a project that's in process and not completed.
Pero como iniciativa en construcción es importante que ustedes la conozcan porque quizás la puedan acoger y también se puedan sumar a ella.
But as an initiative that's being built, maybe it's something that you can use in the work that you're doing as well.
Ellos están pensando hacer en el mes de noviembre en Bruselas, Bélgica, un tribunal internacional contra el bloqueo.
They're thinking of doing an international tribune in Brussels, Belgium, international tribunal against the blockade.
Y este puede ser el comienzo de una iniciativa que puede ir creciendo si nos articulamos los europeos, y se articulan con los estadounidenses y quizás podemos ir sumando a más regiones del mundo.
And that's a project that if we articulate this, maybe this is something that both in Europe and in the US and in other places we can begin to work on
O
together.
sea, la iniciativa es el comienzo de algo que puede ser más grande.
So what's happening is an initiative. It's the beginning of something that could be bigger.
Can I make a quick announcement? I'm sorry to interrupt your wonderful workshop.
Groups.
We're taking the Cuban delegation,
How you
including Sister Noemi and others, to dinner tonight, right down the street from the Malcolm X Center where the event is tonight. It's at the place called the Wahi Diner. It's 3915 Broadway. The Malcolm X Center is 3940 Broadway. So anybody wants to be there around 6:30 and have dinner with the delegation, and you go right over to Malcolm X Center. Sorry, Bob.
Bueno, se aspira con este tribunal denunciar y visibilizar el recrudecimiento del bloqueo.
What we hope to do with this tribunal is to make better known and to denounce the tightening of the blockade.
Llamar la atención sobre la extraterritorialidad del bloqueo.
To bring attention to the extraterritorial aspects of the blockade.
Y condenar la permanencia de Cuba en la lista de países patrocinadores del terrorismo.
And to condemn Cuba's placement on the list of permanent state terrors.
La denuncia se centrará en las afectaciones a la salud pública.
It'll talk about the effect on public health.
Con énfasis en los prejuicios que hoy sufren los pacientes pediátricos, las embarazadas y los discapacitados.
And it'll emphasize the impact on pediatric health, on pregnant women, and on people that have discapacities.
La alimentación y la agricultura, porque hoy es uno de los problemas que más está afectando la calidad de vida de las familias cubanas.
And it's also going to, talk about the impact that it has on the economy and in agriculture and the impact on the Cuban families.
La energía, hablamos de combustible y lo que afecta en el transporte además.
We're going to talk about its impact on energy, on fuel, and the electric grid.
No voy a dar más detalles porque los voy a abrumar. Decía que es un ejercicio en construcción. Todo el que se quiera sumar, aquí estamos, nos los dicen. Y comenzamos a enlazar todas las ideas.
I'm not going to go into more details now because it'll overwhelm you, but I just wanted to point out this so that you can decide on becoming part of this effort.
Terminar diciéndole que este tribunal va a formar parte de una campaña que se llama Cuba.
This is going to be the tribunal is going to be part of a campaign with the theme of Unblock Cuba.
Que se va a lanzar el 28 de marzo a las 8:30 de la noche, hora de Alemania.
It's going to be announced, it's going to be launched on March 28th at 8:30 at night, the time in Germany.
Y lo va a hacer nuestro presidente Fernando González Llor.
And the president of ECAP, Fernando González Llor, is going to make that announcement.
Después les hacemos llegar el link para que se puedan acceder a esta actividad que va a ser híbrida, o sea, se va presencial y virtual para que puedan participar todo el que quiera desde Estados Unidos y desde Europa.
So we're going to, once we have that information, we're going to make that a link available so that everybody that wants to participate from North America and from Europe can be part of this announcement.
Queridos amigos, esto es una acción simbólica, como se decía ahorita.
Dear compañeros, this is a symbolic act, as has been mentioned here earlier.
Pero no podemos cansarnos de hacer cosas que lleguen no solo a los públicos, sino también a los decisores. Es importante que lleguen a los decisores.
So it's important though to do things that get not just to the public, but also to the decision makers.
Por eso queremos que la iniciativa no solo participen los amigos comprometidos, sino que podamos llegar a otros sectores. Es importante llegar para sensibilizarlos por lo que está pasando en Cuba.
We want this to not just get out to the people that are already convinced, but we want to reach out to new people to explain to them what's at stake.
Contamos con la calidad humana de los amigos de Cuba aquí en Estados Unidos.
We count on the friendship and the warmth of the friends of Cuba here in the United
Con el
States.
amor que siempre nos han demostrado.
With the love that you've always demonstrated to
Y
us.
estoy segura que juntos iremos por más.
I'm sure that together we'll be able to go and reach for more.
Thanks, Noemi. And my apologies for going on as long as we did. Presentations. So I'd like to open things up to questions, comments, suggestions, action ideas. What I would ask is that folks be brief as they possibly can, not to make speeches. I have, you can introduce yourself first.
Sure.
Go ahead.
My name is Shelby. I volunteer with IFCO Pastors for Peace, and I went to Cuba last summer with them. Question, or I have two things. A comment is that there is an ongoing tribunal happening that started at the forum on US imperialism in general. And I'm not sure like the status where it's at, but there was a lot coming up in that tribunal on this topic. And so I don't know, maybe you already know about it, but just wanted to make that connection. And then my question, I was wondering if Ms. Gibbs, you could explain the current status of the NYC resolution, or if people are asking me about it, what can I tell them like to get involved?
Well, I'll start, and one of the main people who are working on it, two other people, Wally Clay and Rosemary Miller. The resolution has now 24 sponsors, right, Rosemary?
Yes.
There are 53, 53 members of the council. So therefore, we need half of 53, so at least we need 27 or 20, I would say 28 on the safe side.
34.
What?
34.
34? Oh, right. Yeah. And also, the mayor of New York City, and I'm not a fan of his. He said that he went to Cuba. Yeah, he said he went to Cuba.
That he went.
I don't know when he went, but he did. And so I don't know whether he vote for, I have no idea how he stands on this. Mwala, do you have any idea what his position is? We also need to be able to have enough votes to override a veto.
And what's the deadline for the 34?
What is the deadline?
Yeah, like when, I don't know how this works. When do you need those people on by?
Go ahead.
Well, yeah. We just got another council member on last night. Mercedes Narcisse from Brooklyn. And it's a terrible fact that you don't really have to have any qualifications to be a council member. So the excuses they give sometimes are a trip. But she just said in all this time, she never read it.
Oh, that's fine.
That's honest. It's not wrong.
But what we did was, and we had a number of folks know that, and we want to be available for that, is that we targeted about 11 or 12 members who we think we can work with. About 6 of them we think we could have a real impact on. So what I would suggest is, and let me just give folks our number. Particularly folks who live in New York, people who are in council districts, even if your council member has voted for it, to call them. Because, different council members have different influence on other council members. I was saying that to council member Gail Brewer, very early on supporter, but she has contacts with people who don't necessarily like Charles Barron as council member, and so there's a lot of politics to it. But let me just give you our number. 212-788-6957. 212-788-6957. The sister there in Nzinga, if you need to know who your council member is, she'll tell you, and she'll tell you whether they're on the bill or not. Okay, but we really want to make a push, between now and May 25th, the councilman I said, to get the other folks on. Now, just so that you know, the speaker has a tremendous amount of influence on which bills come to the council to vote on. Our position is we really have enough people now to bring it before the full council. But the council member who's chair of the cultural committee, Chiose, who's a sponsor, he supports the bill. He's chairman of the committee where the bill is. So the most recent thing is that committee is at the point of it has voted and now is trying to get it onto the council floor to vote. The speaker has a lot of power in terms of that. Adrienne Adams is a speaker. She's a council member from Queens. Okay, but technically, every chairperson has the right to bring a bill before the full council. So it's not a legal question. It's not even but the policy question is everybody kind of bows to the speaker. So Chiose, right at this point, is pushing her to bring the bill to the full council. That's literally what's going on now. Whether we have the 34 or not, we want to get it to the full council to vote on. So he's pushing for that. So any efforts you can make to call and stuff, we're going to do that every day now inside, because we think this is an important time period to do it, you know? And so, I mean, that's the status right now. There's a list of people who we think, which I have here, but I really apologize for that, ones we've targeted, who we think we can work with. There's about 12 of them, and now Narcisse has said she signed on, so it's about 11 we could work on. Darlene Mealy, you know, well, she's like a maverick, you know what I mean? she's a maverick. But that's
Circulate that list to Cuba C and they can get it out.
I will. And say who signed on, give you a list of who signed on and who we've targeted, we can work with. And just one other thing, and we're bringing, you know, we brought the Cuban delegation to City Hall to have a conversation with council members. And we were requested to do that again. So we're going to bring the Cuban delegation back into City Hall and invite other council members to sit down and talk.
Thank you.
We're working on a date with that now. You know, the budget stuff is.
Cindy, you had your hand up. Cindy Domingo.
I just wanted to speak to this international tribunal idea. I participated in an international tribunal around Mexico and the impact of US foreign policy towards Mexico. And it's not only a great educational tool, it was a 2-year process, the one we participated in. But it was a great organizing tool because what we did was we went to 3 communities of Mexican immigrants, Seattle, New York, and I think San Francisco, and gathered their stories about what the impact of US foreign policy has been as related to immigrants from Mexico. And that became a part of the formal report. There were probably 200 stories that became part of organizing, interviewing, and gathering those stories. And then when the sections of those reports came out, we televised, we had town halls so that people could hear their stories or tell their stories at the town halls. So it's a great organizing tool.
I would like to say about that too. Decades ago, was my age. It was a Bertrand Russell tribunal around Vietnam. And that there's probably documents and stuff, but it was very powerful. But the thing was, you know, Bertrand Russell was a famous American philosopher, right? So, you know, he was the leader of it. So if you could get, and the promotion, if you could get people to like famous, I mean, I'm sure, you know, you can know who your friends are in the United States, to sign on and support the tribunal when you release it. That would get people.
We're going to swing over here, but before I call on you, being reminded, after you call the White House or after you sent an email in, report back to one of the groups that's coordinating this. Mass Peace Action, DSA, SETI all have bit.ly links that you could plug into. I know it's online. I can't be honest, I can't read it. Steve, maybe you can put out the bit.ly link.
Yeah, I think the Mass Peace Action one is bit.ly. I don't remember, but DSA's is DSAIC.org / remove-Cuba-SSOT.
Get those out by email.
Actually, can you hear me?
The floor is yours.
My name is Pablo Blanco from the Garifuna Nation in the my connection to this conference is to RIFCO. I was on a Salvador caravan in 2014. We went throughout Eastern Seaboard, 2 cities in Texas, well, several cities in Texas and 2 cities in Mexico. So my connection to Cuba is very personal, and it's a strong solidarity because without them, we wouldn't have Garifuna doctors in Honduras. So I have a question regarding the city council persons that signed on to the legislation.
Talking the New York City Council
Yes.
resolution.
Purina Sanchez, Rafael Salamanca. City council in Bronx signed on to the.
Rosemary?
Yes, if someone can answer that.
Okay, there's a sign of, good evening, afternoon, everyone. There's a site that you can go to, the New York City Council legislative site. And that will, and put in 0208, 0208, 0202.
0285.
And all of the names will come up. You can also register to get the information daily from the council, and each time that someone signs on, you'll get a notification. I can put up the within a second, I can put it up.
We'll put it up on the chat. Okay, terrific. Thank you, Rosemary. A hand over here.
Yeah, so back on the tribunals, I know I gotten something from a friend, which I just looked up and I just lost it, but there's these international tribunals that are run through the Frantz Fanon Foundation, and it's actually on blockades and so forth in Cuba. The one on Cuba is coming up on June 10th, and I just posted it on Twitter and I saw NNOC picked it up, so most of you guys should be able to find it if they retweeted it or just liked it, I don't know, but there's that. And then it sounds like in addition to the one Naomi said coming up in November, which is maybe a slightly different focus, but it was good to hear from Cindy too about the nuts and bolts of how it works.
I can speak to the power of these international tribunals. Can't recall, probably 10 years ago, we did a tribunal in London around freedom for the Cuban Five, international tribunal.
Oh, yeah.
Received tremendous global publicity, not so much in the United States. It was after Renee had been released.
Right.
He was able to participate by video.
Oh, yeah.
English would not let him into the country. I can believe that, but it was done with members of parliament. It was a tremendous educational tool, mobilizing tool. It was very important to write the true record of the Cuban Five.
Okay.
Because we get a lot of distortions.
Sure. I just found the name of this. It's the International People's Tribunal on US Imperialism, Sanctions, Blockades, and Economic Coercive Measures.
All right, we've got another question or comment, please.
Yeah, so I had the pleasure of talking to Steve about this a bit earlier, but I wanted to hear some other thoughts. Like, how do y'all think we can give these resolutions more teeth? Because the symbolic resolution is good and all, but like, especially at the state level, are there like economic measures states can take to just like ignore the blockade and trade with Cuba? Are there ways that cities could have closer economic partnerships with Cuba, or like cities could organize their own material aid shipments? Like, what could that look like?
Let me just say, I mean, you know, it's be sanctioned for it, but that's okay, you know. I've always, you know, as Mumia Abdul-Jabbar always says, just because it's legal, don't make it right, right? So that's how that's how I operate. And years ago, some friends of mine, they went to Cuba and received a letter about violating the law. And I represented them on it. They never followed up on it. And one of the things you have to look at, I haven't looked at it recently, but you should look at, is what is the financing of the office that oversees the embargo? Because what Obama did, that people maybe not aware of, Obama basically defunded the office. You know, it's a good way of saying, okay, we don't have time for that. That's not going to happen. I don't know what Biden has done, because Biden, wrote in, I have to say, I voted for Biden. One of the reasons, because he said he was going to return to Obama's policy. Obviously, that was true. But, so you should, just look at that.
I also just want
Steve, you
to,
wanna jump in?
I do want to jump in. I think to get to the level of statewide organizing, we start at the local and we start by building power democratically. And I think that can be done through unions, it can be done through the kind of coalition building I was talking about before. But fundamentally, I don't think that kind of change comes like undirected from people in power. It comes from building a large democratic movement and linking infrastructure once you've built it in your area to people building it in their areas. So I think that's where we need to really focus and put use our organizational infrastructure as leverage against the people in power rather than kind of like constantly asking them to do stuff that they don't want to do.
You have a comment?
Well, yeah, I really like the idea of trying to add something like humanitarian donation as part of it, and that's totally legal. It's also symbolic in the sense of, how much can you really collect? But it's a nice corollary to doing it. And I also wonder, because we're in DC, hopefully going to pass a resolution quite soon. And we thought, well, since we don't have a voting member in Congress, we can take it to all kinds of Congress people, like the whole
Delegate, Eleanor Holmes Norton might. Eleanor Holmes Norton might.
Yeah, but member whose vote. votes. But also this idea of maybe taking the resolutions or sending all the resolutions to Christopher Dodd as the special envoy. And I think we could pass around email for him. Yeah, people have been saying that he would be a good person to put the pressure on.
Yeah, and actually to add to this as well, one thing that we found in Boston was when we passed our resolution, we learned that you can direct the city clerk to send it anywhere. So you can direct the city clerk to send it to Joe Biden, to Chris Dodd, to Secretary Blinken, to Governor Healy in Massachusetts. So don't sleep on that either. It doesn't always need to be coming from constituents. You can also be placing pressure through the channels of government as you pass these.
And how do you know they did it?
Because we have an allied DSA city councilor who is committed to this process and who is a Black internationalist who was the one who introduced the resolution. So it was her idea, and I deeply trust that she did it, just because we have a very good relationship with her. And to the point of actually enforcement, Jen brings up a great point, which is that there was some action that we in DSA were pushing last year around Rashida Tlaib's agricultural amendment to an omnibus spending bill, which was actually essentially about enforcement of defunding enforcement for around agricultural credit. So right now, if you extend credit to Cuba to buy food, you can be penalized by the Treasury. This would have gutted the enforcement mechanisms. So I think those things that was voted down, but it was the largest number of votes that we've received in Congress, more than the last Dear Colleague letter. So we are seeing, at least as a benchmark.
Much less than 100.
It was more than 160. It was about 160. Yeah.
Very close. Talking about the Tlaib amendment.
Yeah.
I defer to Greg. All right, we've got a couple more hands and I'm being told that Noemi's got to leave in a couple minutes. So please go ahead.
Well, I agree with where you were going. We need to be talking about how do we make policy change on a federal level, because foreign policy is federal. To answer your question, Massachusetts tried to establish its own foreign policy with Myanmar in 1997, and the Supreme Court struck it down because foreign policy is federal. So in my view, the way to do that is how do we get Congress to change these things? Cuba policy is not a foreign policy. It's a domestic policy for the bottom half of Florida, and that's it. It's not for us. It's for the bottom half of Florida. So the way we get Democrats to move is we finally convince the Democratic Party that Florida is solid red, and that by holding Cuba policy hostage, it's not going to win them any more seats in Congress. So turning Florida deep red actually might be the answer, because then we can just ignore them.
Quick comment, while you're right in terms of Congress passing legislation, there are 243 acts that Trump did by executive authority.
Yeah.
All of those can be lifted by President Biden. SSOT be lifted by President Biden.
Biden has to be convinced that Florida's gone.
Well, that's a different story, but it doesn't require a congressional vote. It could be done like this, and that's why we're focusing on
Like if
exactly the White House.
DeSantis wins the Republican nomination, he might convince himself that he's gonna lose Florida, and then he can move forward on Cuba policy.
I agree in terms of convincing Biden, but I also object to the notion that we should avoid organizing in Florida. We have 13 Democratic Socialists of America chapters in Florida. Organizing there is just as important as anywhere else in the country.
But it holds back Cuba policy. If you're talking about moving forward on Cuba policy, the Florida Democratic Party is what stands in the way.
We try to jump. We got one more comment, and I think Noemi's got to leave after that, so please.
I'm Calvin from Seattle. I was just curious about the Klobuchar bill. Can that even pass if they're on the state sponsor of terrorism? That would have to be removed, I would assume, in order for you to have a new trade bill. I was thinking similarly about federal policy. We need a strategic entry into that. Who's talking to the Biden administration, which seems to be some of the senators who want that trade bill might have more leverage than we at the kind of resolutions level. I don't know.
You want to respond to that in any way?
I would assume that you could pass it, but that you wouldn't be able to implement a lot of it because of the SSOT, but I don't think it interferes with.
No, you could pass it, but it won't have any effect. So they would have leverage. Senators would have more leverage to change, get the Cuba off the terrorist list.
There's no companion bill in the House, and if you listen to the McGovern comments earlier today, the likelihood of getting anything out of the House is slim to none. So doesn't mean we don't push in the Senate.
But the senators could push to get Biden to make that bill.
Anybody else?
I just think that one of the things that we need to think about as a coalition and as a Cuba solidarity people, and I know it might sound kind of odious, is that there might be allies in the Republican Party that one can work with that are actually in favor of getting rid of the blockade. So it's not just the Democrats that you have to get. You could actually get maybe a certain percentage of the Republicans and a certain percentage and then get a majority. And this has actually kind of happened in the past on occasion, that you got both sides to collaborate on this issue. And that's what actually McGovern was also referring to, is the possibility of building these kinds of bipartisan coalitions. And I think that's something that we as Cuba Solidarity folks need to get accustomed to, that idea, which is kind of difficult, but that might be a way around some of these problems that we're facing.
Is that just theoretical, or is that based on an assessment of some Republicans today?
Yes.
Today,
The
who
Klobuchar
actually
bill
need
is
to-
sponsored by several Republicans. And in the past, there have been these cross bipartisan coalitions on the Cuba
In the
issue.
run up to 2014, there was a bipartisan Cuba working group in Congress that included both Republicans.
It's a whole different ball field than 2014.
I agree, but
MAGA crazy,
That's right.
dominating.
I like the past.
Nothing like that.
work is harder, but we still have to do it. That's my point.
How much energy are you going to spend wasting time with the MAGA Republicans compared to how much energy you're going to spend raising the consciousness of folk in the community, of the different unions and so forth?
That's exactly the approach that I would take is a base building approach to building a coalition. That's what I've been talking about today. But I also think that it would be naive to assume without engaging the levers of power that actually control the embargo, that we're going to change anything with relation to Cuba policy.
I just want to add one more thing. Just want to add one more thing. There are actually MAGA crazies who actually sometimes take good positions on stuff, like Getz, for example, on negotiations in Ukraine.
Wholly unreliable. That's a waste. Spend your energy on things where you know you could make incremental progressive changes in the electoral political game.
Anybody else? So I think we'll close it down now. It's about 6 o'clock. Thank everybody for coming and just keep in touch.
Okay. Oh, it's a little. It's hell, I would have had. We couldn't get one. It's difficult. Not really.
Okay.
Quería decir algo.
Of course.
Todo esto.
Para control bill. Thanks so much, Sky. Yeah.
Quieren secuestrar a Miami. Sí. La quieren secuestrar a Miami, no la Florida.
I think it's so cool. Yeah, she is. She doesn't. So that's what Charlie
Dice la gente.
Read the whole thing. How are you?